Hello, everyone. My apologies for this. At the beginning of the term, I indicated that I had a bias towards unions, and here's another one of the reasons why they can cause chaos. Don't worry, we are going to get through this material and we will get you through the course regardless of what happens, okay? So just bear with us. What we're going to do today is we're going to go over your contract assignment. Then we're going to do some materials. And I want to tell you right at this particular moment so that you all know there is a quiz that is worth 15%, I think, or maybe 10, I can't remember. That's irrelevant. There will be a quiz later on. It's in the lecture schedule. And that quiz will be on the material that we cover today only. Nothing else, okay? So the quiz provides you an opportunity to increase your grade if you find that the midterm exam was harder than you expected or that your contract mark is a little lower than you hoped for. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. It's not, okay? But it is manageable in the sense that there will be a finite amount of material that you have to study for it. And it is basically 3 pages short fill-in-the-blank answers. So you should be able to do a fairly good job on it. Now, if you don't study, oh, hey, this is easy, Professor Holden's giving us this to boost up our marks. No, I'm not. It's an opportunity for you to boost up the marks, but you have to do the work. Okay, on eLearn, I have put some documents in the June 5 to June 11 a week. And the first one that I want to deal with right now is the contract assignment grade memo. You all have one of these attached to the front of your contract assignment, and I am just going to explain how it works. You start off with 25 out of 25, and then as you make mistakes, you actually lower that down. If you just took a blank contract and handed it in, unbelievably, you could get 10.5 out of 25. Okay, so you had to fill in the documents or fill in the document in order to get a better mark. So if you look at the grade assignment memo, it starts off and it says contract parties. There are 2 parties. There's Peak Performance Pontoons Inc. and there's not Microhard Computers. There is Gil Bates doing business as Microhard Computers. So Microhard Computers does not exist. It is a trade name only. And if you sued Microhard Computers, you would lose because you cannot sue something that does not exist. What you would have to do is you'd have to go down to the City Hall, you'd have to look up Microhard Computers, and you would find out it was Gil Bates doing business as, and then you would sue Gil Bates. So if you got a tick for Peak Performance Pontoons, that means you got it right. If you got an X on Gil Bates, for example, that means you got it wrong. And then I would circle the -1, and that means that you are now at 24 out of 25. The description of goods is another good example of how I marked. At the beginning of the contract, it said data processing equipment. What is data processing equipment? If you don't know, you don't leave it in. And in this particular case, it was wrong because Peak Performance Pontoons is buying 3 Quick Think helmets. They're not buying data processing equipment. Data processing equipment are big computers that are used to handle lots of data, supercomputers and that sort of thing. So you would get an X on data processing equipment, and then you would get a tick on 3 Quick Think helmets. So you got it half right. So instead of taking off 1/2 mark, I would only take off, or 1 mark, I would only take off 1/2 mark, and that's why there's a 1/2 circle there. The next thing I want to talk about is the interest calculations. In the materials, and specifically I told you, you had to include your contract or your interest calculations. A lot of people said, hey, here's the amount of interest, but they didn't include the interest calculations, and so you lost a mark, okay? If you included the interest calculations, but you calculated the interest incorrectly, then you would get a tick for the interest calculations, and you would get an X on interest, and the -1 would be circled, which I forgot to do on my example. Anyway, that's how the grading goes. And then at the bottom, you would get a mark out of 25. On the sample I'm using here, it's 16 out of 25. In fact, I have recorded in the marking, in the grade book on eLearn, 17. So everybody got one extra mark. And just let me explain why. A lot of students are international students, and so they're not familiar with our PST and GST systems. So almost everyone got the PST, GST wrong, which means you lost a half a mark. When you sell goods, you have to remit these taxes to the government. Now, if a business buys materials and pays GST and then makes a product and then sells the product and the next person pays GST on that product, the government would be getting the double taxation, okay? And so in a situation like that, you can actually get rebates, which means you may not pay the GST, but you have to at least remit it and then get a refund. Okay, payments was a problem. We'll get into that when we actually start going through the contract precedent itself, though. Anyway, that explains the marking guide, and what you should do is when you get your paper, which will be tomorrow, no, not for you, your Section 5, it'll be on Friday. When you write your exam, after the exam, you can pick up your contract assignment, and you should go through and you should add up all the errors that you make and subtract it from 25 and verify that I've got your mark correct. Okay, now let's look at the contract precedent, which is on eLearn, and it starts off sale agreement between. It's Gil Bates doing business as Microhard Computers. It is not Microhard Computers, okay? And the other party is Peak Performance Pontoons, Inc., not Benton Counter. Benton Counter is working on behalf of this company, so the company has to be the party to the agreement. Gil Bates is not working on behalf of Microhard Computers. Microhard Computers does not exist, so it has to be with Gil Bates. Okay. At the top, installation address. I think you should have eliminated that and put in delivery address, but it didn't really matter. It doesn't make any difference to the actual performance of the contract, so I just left it and didn't take off any marks. First paragraph, it says data processing equipment. We've already talked about that's wrong. Everybody else got the prices and everything correct, but the biggest problem in both sections was putting in dates, okay? Now, the contract precedent does not have dates in there because, well, it's a precedent. There are no dates. But if you have a payment to be made in the contract, which is designed to prevent problems to the greatest extent possible, then you have to put in the date. And the first problem was cash down payment, November 16th, 2023. Then we got down to the calculation of the interest, and you'll note that it says 2 consecutive payments of half the balance plus interest. So because the interest varies for the first period payment and the second period payment, they cannot be equal. Okay? So how does it work? Well, you take the price and then you subtract the down payment, and that leaves you with $30,000 owing. So you take $30,000 and you say, okay, for the first payment period, which is from November 16th to December 15th, is 29 days. That means you cannot calculate it monthly because 29 days is not a month. So you had to calculate it on a per diem basis, a daily basis. And I was specifically telling that on a number of occasions, and a lot of people went off and said, oh, well, the first month's payment is this, and the second month's payment is that. No, you cannot calculate it monthly for 2 reasons. The first one is, as I mentioned, the first period is actually 29 days. So you take 30,000 and you times it by 5%, then you times it by the 29 days, and then you divide by 365. So the first interest owing from November 16th to December 15th is $119.18. That gets added to the 15,000 that is due and owing on December 15th. So the first payment is $15,119.18. The second period is actually 31 days. Still, that means that you have not a month. You have to do it on a per diem basis because the first payment was on a per diem basis. Okay, so what's the period? Well, from December the 16th to January the 15th is 31 days. So you take $15,000 because that's how much is owing now. You've already paid $15,000 on December the 15th. So the balance owing is $15,000 times 5% times 31 days divided by 365, and that equals $63.70. So the January 15th payment is the balance remaining, which is $15,000 plus $63.70. Okay. Now there are two reasons why you have to pay monthly or per diem, not monthly. And I've just realized that I forgot to tell my other class this, so I'm going to have to remember and fill them in. Years ago, the mortgage rates were climbing incredibly high. My wife and I had a mortgage, and we had it at 11%. And it was for, I think, a 1-year period. And when we went to renew, it was going to be 14%. That's a killer, right? Anyway, we were with CIBC, and they were going to charge 14%. National Trust came out with a special for lawyers, and they said lawyers could come in and get a mortgage for 13% instead of 14%. Well, on a large amount of money, 1% difference can make a huge amount. So I told CIBC, well, we're not going to renew with you. We're going to go with National Trust. And then I went to National Trust, and I noticed that they said it would be 13% monthly. And I thought, okay, my CIBC is daily, per diem, and it was 14%. And so I said to National Trust, how much is 13% monthly compared to 14% daily? And they went, what do you mean? Well, you know what you're paying. It's right there. It's in black and white. You're paying 13% monthly. I don't understand. And I said, well, I just want to be able to compare. And they said, well, you know what you're paying. So you're only paying 13%. And I thought something is wrong here. So I went back to CIBC and I said, 13% monthly equals what on a per diem basis? And they said, oh, well, it actually works out to 14.9735% or something like that. So in fact, the so-called special deal for lawyers was actually going to cost more than per diem rate. So I went back to CIBC on bended knees and begged them to allow me to renew my mortgage with them. They could have said, well, I'm sorry, you canceled it. You have to pay an application fee. There has to be a fee for evaluating your house again, and then we'll give you the mortgage. But they were nice. They said, no, we'll just renew it as though it continues. Mind you, they were being nice at 14%, so it was hardly like they were, doing me much of a favor. Anyway, the federal government looked at those sorts of ads and they said, okay, they're absolutely truthful. Okay, it says 13% monthly, so you know what you are paying. But they thought it was unethical because they were leading people astray. That's why they made the offer to lawyers and not accountants, because accountants could have figured it out, whereas lawyers couldn't, okay? And so the federal government passed what's called the Canada Interest Act. And the Canada Interest Act says if you advertise a mortgage or a loan on a monthly basis, you also have to indicate what that is on a per diem or daily basis, okay? And so in this particular problem, you could not calculate interest on a monthly basis because the first period was not a month. And secondly, you couldn't calculate it on a monthly basis unless you also specifically told me under the Canada Interest Act that it was what the per diem rate would be. just by way of further explanation or proof of this is on eLearn, I have put in what's called a mortgage form, a Form B, for the Land Title Office, and it's under the term Canada Interest Act. And this is actually a Form B mortgage. So my clients bought a house and they got a mortgage. And this is the mortgage document that is required by the Land Title Office. And you'll see down on paragraph 5, it says payment provisions. And here the principal amount was $83,616, and the interest rate was 7% per annum. Okay, per annum is daily, right? So there's no problem here. But had that said 7% per month, then you would kick down to under paragraph 5H, the Interest Act of Canada, and you would have to say the equivalent rate of interest calculated half yearly, not in advance, is X percent. Okay, it's not. I put not applicable here because the interest rate was on a per diem basis. But you can see that the Canada Interest Act says, hey, even on a mortgage form filed at the Land Title Office, you have to have the equivalent rate. Okay. All right, so I will get rid of that, and I will get back to the contract precedent. Okay, at the bottom of the first page of the draft precedent, it says effective date and title, and then I've got this red squiggly line. I didn't take any marks off for this. It's just style and format. If you have a title like number 2, effective date and title, and it's at the bottom of the page, kick it to the top of the next page. Okay. All right. Page 2, in paragraph 2.2, it says title to the units will not transfer until all payments are made. That's absolutely important because title is ownership. And so if you haven't finished paying for them yet, you don't own them yet. So I want to keep title, and we'll come back and explain why later. So you probably got a tick on that because most people left that in. I think only a couple of people took it out. Then we get to the next paragraph, 3.2, and it talks about provincial sales tax and GST. On your marking, I said, okay, yeah, you said provincial sales tax would be charged, but where? Like where in the document are you doing it? Okay, and then also I put GST because this precedent doesn't talk about GST, but you have to deal with it. Anyway, I took off a half mark from everybody, and then at the end I said, okay, not enough people knew about this, how it operated, so I gave you that half mark back. The next paragraph, however, talks about rigging and dredge. Here's another one of those terms like data processing equipment. If you don't know what it means, don't put it in the contract. Okay, so you lost a half a mark for that. Okay, delivery. A lot of people left in FOB point of shipment Toronto. Why Toronto? You have somebody in Vancouver who's making Quick Think helmets. That would mean he would actually have to send them back to Toronto and then ship them to North Vancouver, which doesn't make sense. So it really had to be FOB point of shipment Vancouver, not North Van. North Van is where they're delivered to. Point of shipment means the start of the shipment. Now, FOB, what does it mean? Oh, free on board. No, what does it mean? It means the truck backs up to the loading dock at Bill Gates or Gil Bates, Gil Bates' place. As the Quick Think helmets go from the building onto the truck, risk passes to the buyer. Okay, that's the first thing. And then that means that the buyer pays the transportation costs. If you said FOB point of shipment North Vancouver, then what that means is Gil Bates is actually paying for delivery, and that's wrong in the problem. All right? So you had to take that out. Patents. I thought it was going to be a problem, and so I put it on my marking guide. But as a matter of fact, it turned out to be, it works whether you put it in or take it out. It doesn't matter. So nobody lost any marks for that. Then as we work through the document, we get to number 9, which is risk and protection of the equipment. I'm giving you the equipment. You have not paid for it yet. I have title. What happens if they get destroyed? Why should my insurance pay for it? Because you destroyed them, okay? So I say to you, all right, I want you to get insurance on the helmets because they are at your risk from the moment they go onto the truck to be delivered to you. Now, there's a problem here, and that is that Peak Performance Pontoons could say, yeah, sure, fine, and they could go out and get the insurance, pay the premium, and then say to Gil Bates, see, we got insurance, everything's copacetic. Then later on, Peak Performance Pontoons could actually sell that insurance policy back to the insurance company for some money. Okay. Then the Quick Think helmets are stolen or damaged or something, and Gil Bates says, hey, cash in your insurance policy and pay for them. And Peak Performance Pontoon says, oh, about that, gosh, golly gee, sorry, we canceled that. And suddenly Gil Bates is in trouble. So you make the person designate you, Gil Bates, as loss payee on the policy. So that means Peak Performance Pontoons takes the insurance policy and says, hi, I want my money back. And the insurance company says, okay, yeah, we can do that, but first we have to check with Gil Bates because he's the loss payee. Okay, and that would prevent them from selling the insurance policy without Gil Bates knowing. All right, so you have to maintain insurance. Then there's the default provision. Two things in there that are really important. I mean, number one, you want to have a default provision of what happens if Peak Performance Pontoons Inc. doesn't pay. And then the default provision is that the supplier has the right to declare the unpaid balance immediately due and payable and take possession. Okay, 1 second here. Sorry, I had to take a short break there. You own the helmets, they're on their premises, and they haven't paid for it. Let's say they missed the payment in November, or they give you a check and it bounces. You have the right to say that everything is due and owing all at once. But why just the right to do so? Well, you don't get the payment on November the 16th, and so you phone. Or I guess you take your cell phone, hi. And you call in, Benton, you haven't paid it. Oh my gosh! Oh, is it November 16th? I'm sorry, I was supposed to get a check to you. I'll courier it over right away. Everything's copacetic, right? Everything's fine. But if you phone and it's this number is no longer in service, then you want to be able to sue for the full amount all at once. Otherwise, you can sue for the November 16th payment because Peak Performance Pontoons missed it. But you would not be able to sue for the December 15th payment or the January 15th payment because he hasn't missed those yet. Okay, so you sue for the $8,950, and then you wait, and on December 15th they missed that one, so then you sue for $30,000 plus interest, and you wait, and then you sue for the January 15th payment. Those 3 months could be catastrophic as far as your ability to collect any money at all. So you want to be able to move quickly, and so if you phone and this number is no longer in service, then you can start a lawsuit for the full amount, okay? And then the other thing is you own the helmets, you own them, but they're on Peak Performance Pontoons premises. So you pop over there and you go, hey, Benton, I want my helmets back because you haven't paid. And he says, don't come in, you're trespassing. And you go, well, I want my helmets. Don't come in, you're trespassing. What do? Okay. So what you do is you put in this clause that says you have the right to take possession, which means you're allowed to go on the premises to get your goods. All right, moving on. Warranty. Only 1 or 2 people took out the warranty clause. I'm not sure why you would, but you want to be able to buy it. The supplier wants the customer to abide by the warranty provisions. Then we get down to choice of law and choice of forum. In the agreement, it said the laws of the province of Ontario, why, should be the laws of the province of BC. We've covered that in class. And it says the parties agree to return to the jurisdiction of the Superior Court. Okay, as I mentioned in class a couple of times, and this is why you should be taking notes rather than just sitting there. And that is because I said we don't have a Superior Court, and and I actually said it was important for your contract assignment. Oh yeah, okay, I'm sure I'll remember that 3 weeks from now. It just doesn't work. You have to take notes. So you had to say the laws of the province of British Columbia and that you had torn to the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. That prevented you from losing 1.5 marks, but you would automatically lose 1 mark because I had also on numerous occasions said I have never drafted a contract in the last 10 years of my practice that I did not put in a mid-arb clause. Well, what is Peter's teaching material, but it cannot be relevant for the contract assignment. I mean, why would he teach something that we would put in the contract? Okay, I'm being a little facetious, but what I expected and hoped was that you would say, oh, I'm drafting a contract, so maybe I should put in a mid-arb clause. Okay, so if you put in a mid-arb clause, then you would not lose that 1 mark. Here's something, though, that will be on the quiz, and it will be on the quiz on, oh, by the way, this will be on the quiz. If you put in a mid-arb clause, and you also have in your contract the parties agree to return to the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, you don't have mid-arb, okay? You are excluding the courts by going to mid-arb. So you would have to delete that paragraph where you would torn. A torn means I agree to the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Well, if I agree that the Supreme Court has jurisdiction, how do I go and do mid-arb? I cannot, okay? So the proper way to do it, as in the precedent, it says this agreement will be deemed to have been made in North Vancouver, well, no, actually that should be Vancouver, deemed to be made in Vancouver. Why? Because Gil Bates is going to want to sue, and remember we talked about that in contracts. He would have to go over to North Van and file his lawsuit. He would have to go over there to the settlement hearing. He would have to go over there to fight the trial. He would have to go over there to try to collect his money. No, he wants the advantage, okay? Peak Performance Pontoons has the helmets, okay? So Gil Bates is going to say, well, if this goes to small claims court because you don't want to pay, I want it in Vancouver, okay? So you had to say that. That would have been, that would have given me goosebumps because I would be excited. Oh, wow, deemed to be made in Vancouver, laws of the province of British Columbia apply, and mid-arb, okay? All right, the entire agreement clause we're going to talk about when we look at the exam material. But now we get down to the signature lines. I think all but a couple of students got this wrong, okay? I've gone over this. I've gone over this when we did right in the first lecture, we were looking at that check, and I talked about signature lines for corporations, for Peter Holden, for a partnership. And then when we got into contracts, I talked about the application of seals. Here's how a company signs. Here's how individuals sign. And so I was a little disappointed. That being the case, this will be on the quiz, okay? Signature lines will be on the quiz. You'll have to figure out signature lines. And because you probably screwed up on the quiz, and if you do, it will be on the final. There are a few things in this course that I really want you to know when you leave. And one of them is the 6 binding elements of a contract, and the other one is how you execute documents. There's no point in having a contract and then getting the wrong people signing. So Peak Performance Pontoons, Inc., right underneath per, and then authorized signatory. Okay, Gil Bates, just align with Gil Bates. I would prefer if you said Gil Bates doing business as Microhard Computers, but you don't have to. Okay. And then because Uh, you're lending, Gil Bates is lending money to a corporation, and I covered this as well. I said, if you ever lend money to a corporation, you get a guarantee signed under seal from either the director or the owner of that corporation. Okay, and that's why there's a signature line there under Guarantor. Should be guarantor. Guarantor Benton Counter with a seal beside it. Why a seal? Well, the company is getting the loan and they're going to pay back Gil Bates. Benton Counter is getting nothing. Gil Bates is getting the guarantee from Benton Counter, but Benton Counter isn't getting anything, and so in order to get around the problem that there's no consideration to make his signature binding, there has to be a seal on it. The very last thing here is right under where Benton Counter would sign, there's a typo. Instead of date, it says DDTE. Does that affect anything? No, it doesn't, because at law there's something called de minimis non curat lex, which is Latin for the court does not concern itself with trifles. In other words, hey, this is so insignificant, it doesn't affect the contract, it's just a typo, it can be corrected. Okay, and the agreement stays in force. Now, if you put Benton Counter 4 peak performance pontoons, oh, that's a typo. No, it isn't. That goes to a substantive matter. He signed personally, not for the corporation. De minimis non curat lex would not help you in that situation, okay? But small typos can be fixed. Okay, so that is the contract assignment, precedent rather, and the marking guide. Now, the only other material that's going to be covered on this particular quiz that's coming up is the material on the contract drafting form, which is on eLearn as well, and we're going to go through that in detail now. A form of contract, it can be an oral, written, or partly written and partly oral. We've gone through that already. Parties, there are individuals or sole proprietors, there are partnerships, and there are corporations. Microhard Computers is just a trade name, okay? It doesn't legally exist. Microhard Computers may be a trademark, okay? Probably not, though. Microhard Computers is the trade name. They'd probably have Microhard, like Microsoft, okay? And that would be a trademark. But Microhard Computers would be a trade name, the name under which this business is trading or doing business. Company, usually it is not an incorporated business. It can be in some situations, like the Hudson's Bay Company, because it was incorporated so long ago. It was done by the king. Thou art a corporation. But most times, ABC Manufacturing Company will not be a corporation. To be a corporation, it has to end in Ltd, Inc., or Corp. Subject matter, goods, services, or a combination of goods and services, which brings us to the point that we should really talk about goods, because it's defined as personal property of a tangible nature. So now we're going to look at property, and again, this will be on the quiz. It's just a very easy question to ask. We're going to break down property into its two categories, and then the second category into its two subcategories. I need some props, though, so I'm just going to put things on hold for a moment and come back. All right, I've got my props, so continuing on, real property is defined as land, building, and things permanently affixed thereto. Now, in the days of nuclear war, nothing is permanently affixed, but at law, what it means is that if something is affixed to the land in such a way that to remove it would cause substantial damage, then it's considered to be permanently affixed. So the building of Capilano University is obviously attached to the land. The trees, if you cut them down and remove them, there would be stumps and slag, so they're considered to be affixed. Inside, the light fixtures that are built into the ceilings in the rooms, if you took those light fixtures out, you would have big holes in the ceiling and dangling wires, and that would be considered damaged, so the lights would be permanently affixed. However, the overhead projector, which you can see in the classrooms, are on with 4 bolts and a plug. Obviously, they are meant to be put in and taken out, so they would not be considered to be affixed to the land. Personal property breaks down into tangible personal property and intangible personal property. Tangible personal property are things that you can possess and which have value for what they are. So, for example, this is my chair, and it is personal, tangible property because it's valuable for what it is. It's to sit on. Things like computers, sailboats, cars, lamps, anything like that is considered to be a tangible personal property. Now, they used to be called choses in possession. This was the French term, and choses in possession meant that you could actually possess them. And that turned out to be an inadequate definition, so they've changed it to tangible personal property. So, for example, a toonie, and don't tell my wife I've got cash. She'll take it away from me, because if I have money, I just spend it. But a toonie, I can possess it, and it seems pretty tangible. But in fact, it isn't, because how much is this worth? Well, you'd say $2. No, it isn't actually. The metal is worth maybe 1/10 of a cent. Okay, what it represents is buying power. Okay, so this is intangible personal property. They used to call it choses in action, which means you could sue for it. Okay, you could sue someone if they owed you money. Same thing with a bill. It's just a piece of, well, in this case, it used to be paper, but now it's sort of a plastic material. It's almost worthless, but it represents $10 worth of buying power. So intangible personal property is things like a trademark. Hold on one sec. Okay, trademarks, copyrights, patents, industrial designs are all intangible. So I've got a McDonald's cup, and it says McCafe, and there's an R in a circle, which means that's a registered trademark. Well, I cannot possess it, but it has value because it represents McDonald's goodwill. What else? A check, the one we talked about at the beginning of the year. It's a piece of paper. The paper is almost worthless, but the check represents your ability to get money from the bank. The contract that we've just had you draft, for Gil Bates, that represents wealth. Okay, it represents the fact that he's going to get $30,000 on December the 15th and $30,000 on January 15th plus interest. He can actually take that and assign that contract to the bank in return for money. So a contract represents wealth. My knees, for example, if I was in a car accident and I wound up in a wheelchair, I could still teach and I could still do astronomy as a hobby, and so I would be compensated, but not as much as if I was a center for the hockey team that's in the Stanley Cup, the Las Vegas Golden Knights or whatever. If I wound up in a wheelchair, I've lost millions and millions of dollars of revenue. And so your right to sue for a personal injury is a intangible property. Now, gold. I generally walk around the classroom and I look for a girl that's wearing gold earrings, and I say, is that tangible or intangible? Well, if you're wearing it to adorn yourself, then it would be considered tangible. But if I bought some gold as an investment, thinking that the American economy was going to go to heck in a handcart with the, not raising the debt ceiling, then I'm investing. I'm buying it as an investment. Let me think. A picture, a painting. If I bought the Mona Lisa, I might be doing it because I really like it and it's on my wall. Wow. So it would be tangible because it's valuable for what it is. But if I was buying it because then I could hold on to it for a while and sell it in a couple of years, then it would be intangible because it's an investment. All right, chattels is old terminology for tangible personal property. You used to be able to get a chattel mortgage on equipment. You'd get a mortgage on land, or you'd get a chattel mortgage on your equipment. That is passé now because we have modernized our legal system of taking charges on equipment, and we'll deal with that in a little while. Okay, so you might hear that term, but that's what that means. Okay, the assignment clause. A contract is assignable unless it says otherwise. Okay, so in this particular case here, the clause, it says it's personal to the distributor. So in other words, what it means is if I give someone the distribution rights, I want that person. Okay, I don't want him to then assign it to somebody else who isn't as good a salesman. And so I can say it's personal to that person and he cannot assign it. But most contracts are assignable, and that's what gives it value. It's an intangible asset which can be assigned to the bank. Boilerplate clauses, a term that lawyers use sometimes. What it refers to is these people, Gil Bates and Benton Counter, got together and they negotiated this contract, and then they gave the information to their lawyers and said draft the contract itself. And so the lawyers put in clauses that Gil Bates and Benton Counter wouldn't think about. And we call those boilerplate. Some examples are the entire agreement clause, which we'll talk about, the med-arb clause, the choice of law clause, inurement clause, counterpart signatures, boilerplate. Boilerplate. What's boilerplate? Steam engines. Steam can be incredibly explosive because of the pressure. So steam engines on ships would have boilerplate, big plates, bolted around them to hold the machine together. Well, the boilerplate clauses are clauses that lawyers put in to hold the contract together, to make it work better. There are always problems because they're drafted and mistakes can be made, but for the most part, a contract is designed to eliminate problems whenever possible. So let's look at a couple of examples. The inurement clause, all the terms and provisions of this agreement shall inure to the benefit of and be binding upon the parties hereto and their respective executors, administrators, representatives, successors, and permitted assigns. What that means is Gil Bates sells his business to someone else. And so does that mean the contract it comes to an end? No. It would be assigned to the next business, because that would be a successor business. That clause means the contract remains and Peak Performance Pontoons has to pay. Permitted assigns, again, is there any restriction on assigns? But let's say Gil Bates passes away. Well, what happens? The assets, the business, will then be taken over by the executor if there's a will, the administrator if there isn't a will, or if Gil Bates is just in the hospital and unable to do anything, then the business will transfer to his representative. So it just keeps the contract going because, as I mentioned, the courts do not like to set aside contracts. Counterparts. Let's say Gil Bates is in Vancouver and he sells 10 Quick Think helmets to Crocodile Dundee in Australia. Does Gil go down to Australia to sign, or does Dundee come up to Vancouver to sign? You don't have to. What happens is for copies of the contract are made. 2 are given to Gil Bates and 2 are given to Croc Dundee. Gil Bates signs both, sends one of them to Croc Dundee. Croc Dundee signs both and sends one to Gil Bates. Now, with the counterpart signature provision in there, Gil Bates has a copy signed by him and by Croc Dundee. Contract. Croc Dundee has one signed by him and one by Gil Bates. Contract. So contract counterparts just allows for the facilitation of contracts when they're in different jurisdictions. Interpretation of contracts, express terms and implied terms. We've already gone through that in the contract section. Express term is a term which we have expressed either verbally, I'll sell my car to you, I accept, or in writing, as in this contract. But then there are things called implied terms, and that's the S.S. Moorcock case where the ship was coming into the harbor and he asked the wharfinger, is it safe to, or, can I tie up at the dock? And the wharfinger said yes. He ties up, the tide goes down, hole punches in the bottom of the boat, and the wharfinger said, hey, I said you could tie up, but I didn't say it was safe to do so. Well, the courts will imply a term in the contract to the effect that when he asked if he could tie up, obviously he meant, is it safe to do so? Okay, the next part is the parole evidence rule, and it is really quite dangerous because it's a rule at law that you don't know about. Or if you do, it's probably because there was a problem. Parole means extrinsic to or outside of. So a term previously agreed upon but not included in the written contract will not be used or cannot be used to contradict the written contract. So let's change our scenario here a little bit. Let's say that Gil Bates says, okay, I'll sell you 3 quick think helmets and I'll give you 3 extra light bulbs. Okay, remember the 3 light bulbs in the helmet. So he says, so I'll just give you 3 extra as a bonus. And so when the contract is drafted, there's no reference to getting the 3 light bulbs. And you say, well, wait a minute, Gil, you're going to give me 3 light bulbs. And Gil Bates says, yeah, I'm going to. And well, why isn't it in the contract? And Gil goes, well, come on, look at it. The contract, it says what I'm buying or what you're buying and what I'm selling and, all the terms and conditions, but I'm giving these. So, why would I put that in there? And you go, oh, okay, sure, fine. Yeah, that makes sense. Then you buy the Quick Think helmets and you say, hey, Gil, I didn't get my 3 light bulbs. And Gil says, oh, well, they're very expensive. So because it was a gratuitous promise that I was going to give them to you, I've decided not to. You have to buy them. And you go, what? Maybe it's part of the deal. Well, no, it's not. You reduced it to writing in the contract. The parole evidence rule says his promise to give you 3 cannot be used to contradict the contract or get it set aside. That's the parole evidence rule. Okay? A couple of anecdotes to punch this idea home. The first one is there was a young fellow in Vancouver years ago, and he was a mover and a shaker and an up-and-comer. He was well known in the business community. He had a great product. Everybody liked him. Things looked really rosy for him. And then what happened was he decided to go public, and the promoters took him to the cleaners, and and he went bankrupt. But that's an aside. While he was very popular and doing really well, his father had a problem. His father was a driver mechanic for Budget Rent-A-Truck and had his 3rd drunk driving conviction. So Budget Rent-A-Truck fired him. Well, he has a mortgage and he has car loans and probably Visa and things like that. And so things look really desperate. So the son decided he was going to help his father. And he got his father and his mother into a contract to buy a fish and chips restaurant. And they had signed the contract, and then the young fellow came into my office with the father and he said, handle a transaction. So I was going through the agreement and I went, ooh, there's no financials in here. So I said, how do you know the restaurant's making any money? And the young fellow said, oh, don't worry about that. And I said, oh, okay. And I said, no, wait a minute. I'm the lawyer. You pay me to worry about those kinds of things. There are no financials in here, so how do you know it's making any money? And he said, oh, because they told us. And I went, oh, okay. Whoa, they told you? They didn't give you any financial statements or anything? And he, no, they told us. And I said, but what if it's not making money? And they said, oh, don't worry. They would not lie to us. They are from the same ethnic group we are. Okay? East European. The vendors are East European. My client and his father were East Europeans. So there's no way that they would ever lie to each other. So I was really worried, and I thought, okay, my recommendation is that you forego your deposit, you lose your deposit, and you do not buy the restaurant unless they provide you financials. And the son said, no, just go ahead and do it. So I did a CYA letter, which is something you should consider doing in business every once in a while. A CYA letter is a cover your assets, okay? Cover yourself. So I sent a letter saying it's my recommendation that you don't buy. But we went ahead with the deal anyway, and they bought the restaurant, and hey, guess what? It was not making any money at all. And so the young son came in and he said, look, I want to sue these people. And I said, well, you cannot do that. I mean, you could sue, but you will not be successful because of the parole evidence rule. Here, you're buying the assets of the restaurant. Oh, yeah, it's making money. That's a verbal representation. Oh, wait, it's fraud. You can circumvent the parole evidence rule sometimes with fraud. But how do you prove it's fraud? The people who were running the restaurant had run it for a long time. It was making money, probably, okay, because they knew what they were doing. You buy it after it's been closed down for a couple of months, and suddenly the patrons are gone, and you're not very good at running it. And so, sure, it failed. So you just wouldn't win in court, okay? And so you have to remember that. If somebody's dancing around suggesting all reasons why something shouldn't go into a contract, little red flags should be going up, and you should be cautioned. If they're honest and upright, and you say, hey, Gil, you said you were going to give us the 3 light bulbs. How come it's in the contract? And Gil says, oh, well, I'm giving them to you. The contract is what you're buying and what I'm selling, and I'm giving those to you. And you say, well, yeah, but, it's part of the deal. And he says, oh, okay, put it in. Well, then he's, honest and upright. But if he's dancing around explaining why it shouldn't go in there, then you have to be a little cautious. One other anecdote of a similar nature, a woman came in and retained me to help her buy a travel agency. And the travel agency was owned by a Japanese resident, but not a citizen, and not quite true. It was owned by his corporation, okay? He had a holding company and an operating company. Pardon me, and he wanted to sell and he wanted to go back to Japan. So this woman wanted to buy it, and she came in and she said she wanted to buy the corporations. And I said, no, don't buy the corporations. Just buy the assets and the clients. And she said, oh no, he doesn't need his corporations anymore, so he wants to sell them because he's going back to Japan. And I said, but the problem is if you buy the corporations, you get what's called contingent liabilities. Liabilities that maybe he doesn't know about or anybody knows about. Somebody is about to sue the company or there's some other problem. You buy the corporations, you get the problem, okay? And she said, oh, no, he would never do anything. He wouldn't cheat me. He is Japanese and I am Japanese, okay? Which I thought it was a bit of an insult to me because that suggests I would cheat her, but he wouldn't. Anyway, so I did a CYA letter and said it's my recommendation that you don't buy the corporations. And she said, okay, I want to go ahead. So we bought it. And it was making tons of money. It was a phenomenal business. So what's the problem here? Well, the problem is he had been paying his GST. She bought the business and she began paying the GST. Now, the tax department, when it's receiving GST, assumes that you're being honest. Okay? And then when there's a huge change, all of a sudden they go, whoa, what happened? And then they investigate. So he'd been paying this amount, and suddenly she's paying this amount 1 month later. And so the tax department came and said, we want to look at your books. And it turned out he should have been paying that much GST, but he was only paying that much GST. She buys the corporation. She has to pay the missing GST. She has to pay the penalties, and she has to pay the interest. She wanted to sue me. I got a call from her new lawyer who said, Peter, you're going to have to contact your insurance because you're going to be sued. I sent him a copy of my CYA letter, and I sent him a copy of my bill, which shows she paid for my advice. And he called me back and he said, oh, okay, yeah, forget it. It was her mistake. So the CYA letters, that's why you do them, okay? And the parole evidence rule is something you have to be very careful about. And the point of the story is I'm not picking on East Europeans and I'm not picking on Japanese. What I'm saying is if somebody's going to cheat you, they're going to cheat you. It doesn't matter what ethnic origin they are or the color of their skin or their language or anything, okay? There are good people and bad people. You cross the T's, you dot the I's, you'll have a better chance of surviving in business. All right, in the contract that you drafted, there was an entire agreement clause right at the end. It said the agreement represents the entire agreement between the parties with regard to the sale of the equipment herein and supersedes all prior oral and written proposals or communications. That is the parole evidence rule. Now, most times when people draft their own contracts, they do not put that in. But this is one of the boilerplate clauses that lawyers put in, and then I'm reviewing it with you, and you go, well, I don't understand that. What's that mean? And I say, well, that means if he says he's going to give you 3 light bulbs, he doesn't have to unless you put it into the agreement. Okay? Condition precedent, condition subsequent. A term of a proposed contract which must be satisfied before it becomes final and binding is a condition precedent. The best example is a real estate purchase. You want to buy a house, but you need a mortgage. Well, if you find the house and you put a down payment, and then you go and you cannot get a mortgage, you lose your down payment, and you don't get the house. But if you go and get the mortgage before you find your house, it may be months and months and months before you actually find the house you want, and you're paying principal and interest. So it's catch-22. So what you do in a situation like this is you put in a condition precedent. You give the deposit, and you say, I'm purchasing this house subject to my ability to get a $400,000 mortgage from the Royal Bank of Canada at such and such an interest within 10 days' time. And then you go to the Royal Bank and they say, nope, sorry, you're too big of a risk, and they don't give you the money. The contract is null and void. You get your deposit back. Okay, so it safeguards your deposit. On the other side of the coin, though, this wouldn't be fair to the vendor of the property because he says, whoa, okay, all of a sudden for 10 days in this really good market, I'm have to wait. What happens if I wait the 10 days and you don't buy it because you cannot get the mortgage? Then I've got to try to sell it again. So the vendor can put in a condition precedent clause which says, in the event that I receive a better offer or a full cash offer, you have 72 hours to get rid of that clause, buy the property, or I can sell it to somebody else. So condition precedent clause, which must be satisfied before the contract is actually final and binding. A condition subsequent, though, is a clause in a contract which allows you to set it aside after you've entered in the agreement and perhaps performed part of it. Okay, so let's use the NHL Stanley Cup playoffs. We got the Las Vegas Knights, Golden Knights, playing against the Florida Panthers. Yeah, Florida Panthers. So you're a Knights fan, a Golden Knights fan, and so you get tickets to the game, which would cost anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000. Okay. And you go to the game and you get there a little early because you want to watch the hockey players warm up, and you have a beer. And well, you had a beer with the meal before you got there too. And then in the first period of the hockey game, you buy a beer and you're drinking and watching the game. And then between the first and second period, there's a time when they're not playing, so you buy another beer, and you buy another one for the second period. And pretty soon you're inebriated, and you're up there saying, "Go Lions, go! Go Lions, go!" Because you're so drunk, you think you're at a football game with the BC Lions. And you're spilling beer on the guy next to you, and you're punching out this guy over here because he's a Panther fan. And, the authorities come and they kick you out. Wait a minute, I had a contract. This is breach of contract. I paid to watch the game, and you're kicking me out. On the back of the ticket, it will say that in the event that you're rowdy, they have the right to bring the contract to an end and kick you out. Another example is we have a fair in town. I don't know whether they'll be starting it up again now that COVID is sort of on hold, but it was the Pacific National Exhibition, and they used to have outside venues where they bring in artists, singers and dancers and stuff. Well, you buy a ticket and you go down there and it rains and they cancel those. You go, "Hey, I want my money back." No. On the back of the ticket it says they have the right to cancel the outside events in the case of inclement weather, and you still have a ticket to see everything else. So you actually have to perform the contract, but you don't get part of what you've bargained for. So that's a condition subsequent. Signature lines, we've already gone over those. And individual signs, here's a signature line for someone by the name of Dagmar Francine. On the contract, you don't put individual, okay? You just put the signature line. So for our contract, it was Gil Bates. Partnership, if Gil Bates was in partner with somebody else, all you have to do is get one partner's signature, and then the contract is binding. If there's only a couple of partners, my recommendation is get everybody to sign, because one partner can bind the partnership to an agreement with you, but if the other partner starts fighting with that partner and they wind up in court, it may be that the thing drags on and you're asking to be performed, or the contract to be performed, and they won't do it. So get everybody to sign if possible. Pardon me. And all you do is say Dagmar Francine, partner. Corporation, here's another example, Net Your Customers Inc. per authorized signatory. Strictly speaking, authorized signatory is not necessary, but in the world according to Peter Holden, I recommend that you put it on there. Per means you're signing on behalf of Net Your Customers Inc. Authorized signatory just says I'm an authorized signatory, so I can do that. And then there's a guarantee. Okay. Security for payment, last thing we're going to talk about. You should do everything you possibly can to make sure that you get paid. There is no way that you can make sure that you will be paid for sure unless you get paid in advance. Otherwise, a business can go insolvent and there's just nothing you can do about it. But there are a number of things you can do, and should do as many as possible. The first one is a retainer. That works for lawyers and accountants. My all-time favorite client, Ray, says he wants to talk to me about a contract. I figured it's going to be 1 hour. My billable rate at that time was $200 an hour, so I said, okay, bring in $200. Okay, and if it's just 1 hour, then it's covered, and I get paid. But if it goes for an hour and a half, he paid me $200 and he owes me $100. I may not get that $100, but the retainer really helps. Same thing with the deposit or down payment. In this contract that we just did, there was a down payment of $8,950. That probably covers all the equipment that went into the helmet plus something. Okay, so it's better than nothing if everything goes south. Retain title to the goods. That allows you to repossess, okay? And then you want to have an acceleration clause, which is that clause that says the unpaid balance becomes immediately due and payable, okay? It's called an acceleration clause. And I put that on the quiz sometimes. I put that clause in, I say, what kind of clause is that? And then all you have to do is fill in the acceleration clause, okay? What happens, though, if you cannot keep title? So, for example, somebody wants to buy some equipment and they go to the bank and they can get some money but not enough. So the bank wants the goods sold to the person, and that way they can take a personal property security agreement on it, which means Peak Performance Pontoons owns the helmets, but the bank has first charge, and they register that charge in Victoria. But the bank does not give you enough, and so I, as the vendor of that equipment, agree to finance the rest. Well, I want to get a personal property security agreement on it as well, which puts me in a second position behind the bank. And to do that, we file a financing statement in Victoria with the provincial government. Not financial statements. Financial statements are balance sheet, income statement, and cash flow. A financing statement is just a one-page document where you say the following equipment is the bank or the Royal Bank of Canada has the first charge on the following equipment. And then mine would say Gil Bates, doing business as Microhard Computers, has a personal property security agreement on the equipment second to the bank. Okay. And then if the goods are sold, if the business pays off part of the goods and then disaster strikes, the goods are sold, well, the bank's probably been paid out, which means Gil Bates will get the rest of the money. But if it happens quickly, the bank will probably get most of the money and Gil Bates will get nothing. All right, letters of credit. Gil Bates is selling helmets to Crocodile Dundee in Australia. Crocodile Dundee says, I'll pay once you've sent me the helmets. And you go, whoa, no way, I'm not going to send you the helmets and then wait to be paid. What if you don't pay me? I have to go to Australia to chase after you? No way. And so you say, you pay me and I'll send the helmets. And Croc Dundee says, whoa, I'm not going to pay you because what happens if you don't send the helmets? I have to go up there to chase you. So the letter of credit is a method whereby you can circumvent this catch-22. What happens is Gil Bates, Croc Dundee, who's buying the helmets, goes to his bank and says, I need a letter of credit for, $38,950. And the bank then sets up that letter of credit, and they make some deal with Croc Dundee because it's the customer for payment. Okay, but the money is transferred to the bank, and Croc Dundee cannot get it back. Okay, so what happens? Well, the letter of credit will say once the goods are shipped, then the bank has to pay Gil Bates. So as long as Gil Bates sends the helmets, he knows he's going to get the money. And everybody's happy. So what happens is Gil Bates gets the helmets on a ship, sends the documents to the bank looks at the documents, the helmets have been shipped, they pay Gil Bates. What happens if the ship goes sinks, and Croc Dundee calls his bank and says, stop the letter of credit because the ship sank, I'm not getting my helmets. Delivery has already occurred. When it put on the ship, FOB, delivery has occurred. It's at the risk of Croc Dundee. So the bank says, hey, go to your insurance company. Hopefully you've insured the shipment because we have to pay out the goods were shipped. So it's a very, very secure way of making sure you're paid. You can use them for other reasons too, but generally it's in international trade. Then the other thing is insurance. Get insurance. Okay, wait a minute. If we get insurance, why bother doing anything else? Well, insurance companies are reluctant to pay out. Quite often they drag their feet. What do you do in the meantime? So you've done some other things, so you're compensated. The other thing is insurance companies go insolvent. Okay, so an insurance company goes insolvent, you no longer have insurance unless another insurance buys those policies. So you want to make sure that you get insurance, but you don't necessarily count on it. And then make sure if you make the other person get insurance that you are designated as loss payee. And then the last one is personal guarantee. So you get a guarantee from the owner of a corporation or the director and officer of a corporation that they'll pay if the corporation does not. So you do as many of these things as possible because you don't know what's going to fail and what's going to work. Okay, so the quiz will take place. Whether there's a strike still going on or not, we will somehow do it. And that's the finite amount of material that will be on the quiz. And so now what I'll do is I'll upload this to the YouTube so that you can start studying. Thank you very much.